Hello and welcome to How to Win the Lottery Eco Module, book number 9, episode number 10, The Deluge by Stephen Markley. I'm Joey Lewandowski.
And I'm the guy who says deluge correctly.
Oh, we did this on the car ride home. I don't remember.
I think that's it. Deluge.
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 Delusional.
Deluge. It's a weird word. Deluge.
This book depressed me.
It's the most depressing thing that we've read so far.
This
And the scariest and the like.
And the most grounded.
Yeah. It's
which makes it scary.
Realism in a mode of disaster fiction.
It is a book that basically takes the next 20 years. It was written a couple years ago, but it takes the next 20 years, like 2020 to 2040, basically, and just maps out like what's going to happen to the world.
Yeah, what could conceivably happen with climate disaster whilst politicians and corporations get in the way of any real method to change, and the ways in which I think the way that I tried to characterize it when we were talking about it a little bit earlier was the ways in which the world is made up of a number of systems whose goals interfere with each other, but each system is powerful enough to make sure that the other system cannot achieve those goals. And so you end up with total stasis and no problems getting solved, despite the enormity of those problems and the consequences of those problems not getting solved.
Yep. Real bummer.
A real bummer. 888 pages of sort of like what starts as a sort of slow moving movement toward total chaos. And then as you go further and further, it picks up the momentum.
Well, there is
avalanche.
I was saying to you, there are probably 400 or 500 pages, which seems insane to say, but feels probably accurate. Where you're like, this has to be like it's like right before the denouement. Like it's just like this is gonna be the breaking point, and then it doesn't.
Yeah, truly.
And it just keeps getting worse.
Like 400 pages in, you're just like, you already kind of have the lay of the land on how the book is actually going to go.
Yep.
You know that it's like a chronological culmination of things getting worse.
Told from like 3 or 4 different people's perspectives.
And once you get 400 pages in, you know the way the book is going to go, and you just go, this is going to be a tough ride.
Yep. We're recording this about a month before this episode comes out. And in the 5 weeks or so it took me to read this book, it has basically been like 90 degrees or hotter here every single day. There have been crazy political things.
Donald Trump was shot at a rally yesterday.
Our current president seems to be losing his faculties in real time in front of all of us. It's like we're in the book, like with the book.
The realism of the book is affecting the way you perceive the world is mapping very specifically with the way that you perceive the book.
Yes. And
there's something about that makes me feel cold inside. It makes me like it's like a fist kind of wrapping around your spine and making you feel like bad about stuff, man. It's not a good feeling.
I think this book is ambitious, but I also think it's like weirdly not.
Yeah.
In a way that is not an insult, but just like it's like it's almost like, again, this is going to sound like a thing that like sounds like not an insult, but like it's not. But the same way with live blog, it's like anybody could do this. It's just that nobody has and nobody's good at it, right? It's just like anybody could write down what they do step by step during the day. Anybody could think about what happens over the course of the next 20 years and like map it out, or like what could happen or whatever. No one has. But it feels like this guy, Stephen Markley, was just like, well, what if we just figured out where we went from here and what could possibly happen?
Yeah, it's very plain spoken. It's written, Stephen Markley received significant praise from Stephen King, and that does feel like it maps, right? Because Stephen King writes these kinds of books that are like epic in scope, have a lot of characters that are like all participating. I'm thinking specifically of The Stand here, that are all participating in the forward momentum of the narrative, but in spite of the amount of characters or the amount of stuff happening in the text, it's never confusing.
Nope.
You never feel lost in it. It's not symbolic. There's no real metaphor. It's not using tricks or there are some like literary flourishes in here where you have like very clearly it's like, oh, this is like from the memoir or Ash's
like
reports,
memos to the whatever. Yeah.
The like you have the VR telling the story of the person.
There's also like some things that like I feel like they only kind of could happen where like you realize that it was Shane with Kate when they rented the canoe from Matt. Like you like it's a book thing where it's like a character you don't think is a character becomes a character much later.
I'll
in the book.
say that's an interesting thing to bring up before we've really talked about it, because that was the one thing in the text, in the entire text.
When it happens the first time or when it comes back around?
When you learn at the end that was Shane with Kate, where I was just like, come on.
Right.
Like that's like too booky. That's too much like we're in a book and these people knew each other. Cause like you don't need that. You don't need that for the narrative to work. It only works in a very like biblical way, in that like, what is it that happens in the Bible? Like Dismas, the penitent thief, like had harassed Jesus's family like on the road earlier in the text. And you're just like, you don't need Dismas and Jesus to know each other for it to like matter that they're on the cross at the end next to each other.
The same thing,
it's like that's such a literary conceit for it to.
I mean, there's also like in this, there's like the VR meetings that they're taking about like all these people who are like different avatars, like Ash's Shane Battier, which I think was very funny. But like people like Donald Duck as Trump or whatever, Trump Donald Duck or whatever. And then when they unmask themselves, you realize over the course of the next like 100 pages or so that like all those people are like everyone we've been following.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of like things like on Lost. There was one episode where it was told from two background characters' perspectives because the creators of that show have been getting fan mail that said, why is everything happening to these like 8 or 10 people?
Right, yeah.
And so there was an episode where they followed these characters, Nikki and Paolo, and they were just like in the background of shots and like just like sort of like looking at things as they're happening or whatever. And the fans were like, oh, we hate this episode. Just like, well, you want, like, it's the same thing, but just like, it's the kind of thing, just like, why does everything in this show happen to these 8 people? It's like, well, because that's how TV works.
And those are the people that we're following. It would be, we could follow these other people. It would be a different show.
Or like, on the other hand, it's like we're following them because things are happening to them. Like there's like, whatever. So it's the same thing here. It's just like, is it a coincidence that like our 4 narrators and their partners are all in this VR meeting? Yes. But also like they're in the VR meeting because we're following them and because it makes sense. It's like, you can't just be people that, you know what I mean? Like it's the kind of thing where it's like, is it coincidental? Yes. But also like it's how it has to be.
Right. Like if you were writing the book of American politics, you wouldn't be like, oh, like what a coincidence that George Stephanopoulos is now interviewing Hillary Clinton when he had like been a campaign manager for Bill Clinton. And it's like, no, that's the way that the world works. Like these things, it's kind of, I imagine that the world of climate activism is actually a pretty small world.
Right.
And so all of these people would by necessity kind of know each other and interact in exactly this way. But that's not what happens with Shane and Kate. They meet coincidentally. I mean, it's by the Dakota pipeline thing. I don't know. It just feels too like you kept that from us and then you revealed it. And we're supposed to be like, but to me, it didn't feel like the kind of reveal that I was in love with. It felt like kind of reveal that reminded me that I was reading a book when everything else had been so focused on what I thought of as like social realism to that point.
The other unrealistic thing is that the Cleveland Browns win Super Bowl 61. There's a guy at one scene was wearing a Cleveland Browns Super Bowl 61 hats, which is in 2 seasons. So just get ready for that.
Yeah, probably not going to happen. But also Stephen Markley is an Ohio boy, so probably that's where that comes from.
Is that Ohio book in our Ohio module?
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. This is a crazy question. Did you like this book?
I really liked this book.
Did it really bum you out?
It did, yeah. It scared me, gave me anxiety, the proper amount of anxiety. It made me think.
Did it make you feel hopeless? Like truly beyond repair?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't know about beyond repair, But like, I mean, I feel fairly hopeless anyway. So the idea of like something like this, I look at and I think like there are still people that will work to solve these problems even as the world burns. And even if things don't get better, there is still meaning in fighting for them to get better.
Sure.
Right?
I think there's two ways. You either like curl up into a ball.
Yeah.
Or I guess three things. Or just like keep going as you are, like try to be like a little bit better, or like quit your job and like go do this full time or something.
Well, it's what, you know, it's Winston and Julia in 1984 like go through that stuff a lot. They you know, there's a lot of like, we know that we're not going to stop Big Brother. We know for sure that we're going to get caught eventually and that we're probably going to get killed. And that's okay because some losses are better than other losses. Mm-hmm. If you lose without trying, then that is a loss that you cannot feel good about. But if you lose while extending all of yourself in the effort, then, you know, you still get tortured. You still get rats put in your face and you fucking die.
Still go to a black site for 17 months.
Yeah. But like also at the end of the day, you can be at peace with yourself and your maker, whatever that may be. Mm-hmm. So, you know, some losses are better than other losses. And there's hope in that. But as I don't think, what I think Stephen Markley accurately shows us is that there's not much hope for cooperation.
Well, I think it's the same thing where you were saying that everyone has like the power to undo each other. It's like not only the people in power, but like the groups that are activist groups that theoretically have the same goals, but don't do things the same way and are running into one another, or alt-right groups or cult-like followings of people who singularly don't have power, but as a group have power to do something.
Yeah.
And it's not just politicians and corporations checking other politicians' hopes and dreams. It's like groups who, like, even in activism, are getting stopped by other groups in the same similar kind of activism.
Yeah. So why don't we try to go through the book, like through characters, which I think is probably the easiest way to go through. Cause then we can also talk about their individual ideologies and things like that. Who do you think of as like the main character for the book?
Matt.
That's interesting that Matt is the main character for you. Why do you think that Matt is the main character? Because he disappears for the last quarter of the book.
He comes at the end.
He comes back at the end. Yeah, that's true.
Well, because like also Jackie, I think she's like the one main character who doesn't really resolve.
Okay.
I think Matt is maybe the main. I mean, it's hard to say. I don't think there's like a necessarily right answer, but I think he is the one who it sort of starts with.
Yeah.
And it ends with. And I think if you're going, and like it's not based on page count, but if you're going by years, it seems like he kind of covers the last like 3 or 4 years solo. Where like he's talking about his daughter growing up and he's like slowly writing his manuscript.
And he's also maybe a substitute for your average person reading the book who is maybe not like, he was drawn into the climate fight, but he was not like, he wanted to do other stuff.
Right.
And he leaves because it gets too serious for him. And so he like, I think when you read and you look at Matt, you think like that could be me.
I also think he's maybe the main character because he is the only one, or not the only one, but like one of the ones who is close to another character who could vie for the main character in Kate.
Okay. Yeah. So Matt is a person that, how does he start the novel? What is what's
he's a scientist, right? And he gets like the anthrax envelope. That's cornmeal. Like
no, that's not Matt.
That's not Matt.
That's James Petrus, the professor guy.
Okay.
Who ends up being the or Tony.
Tony. Oh yeah, Tony.
Who ends up being the guy that gets cancer at the end. Matt's not the scientist. Matt is like, he wants to write fiction.
Right.
And so he is like working in Wyoming.
I'm going to be fuzzy on details.
He's working in Wyoming as like a guy that is like selling
canoe. He's renting canoes.
Canoes to people. And then Kate shows up and then he falls into the climate thing through being in love with Kate.
Right. I also think that he's also a viable possible main character because he's one who kind of comes of age. Like, he's not only a stand-in for us in that he's drawn into it, but he's like a 20-year-old idiot kind of, or whatever, 20-ish.
Yeah.
And then by the end, he's like 40 and like has seen things and has sort of chosen to opt out of things too, right?
Right, yeah.
It's like he's somebody who knows nothing. Like, Kate comes in kind of fully formed.
Sure of herself, knows what she's doing, has already been a climate activist, starts acting as someone who wants to save the buffalo specifically, but then gets sort of...
she kind of goes where she's needed or where she feels drawn to.
She ends up being the head of this group called the Fierce Blue
Fire.
Mm-hmm. And a Fierce Blue Fire is a sort of more extremist version of the climate activists that were trying to create the Green New Deal. Your AOCs and people like that.
But she's not a politician. She's just an activist.
She's not a politician. She's just an activist. But she's also like represents a sort of
radical
in some ways feminist ideal of someone who is like in charge of her own body, apologizes for nothing,
works hard, parties hard,
non-monogamous,
lives hard,
really just like lives the life that she wants to, is unafraid, cannot be made to apologize for who she is. And this enrages people around her because they want to, they spend time slut shaming her. They spend time. She can't be everything for everyone. She a Fierce Blue Fire really like denounces violence, which comes to be like a big point later on. And she is hated by the left wing because she is sort of a one-issue activist, and that issue is climate.
Yeah.
And that allows her to pair up with right-wing people who are also interested in climate, but who she needs because she sees climate change as something that you heard about a lot during the last round, the way back, the 2020 round of presidential debates about how climate change is an existential threat. So she sees climate change as this existential threat. So she thinks it's more important that we pair with Republicans to fix climate change, even if they're going to limit women's rights, even if they're going to do this, because if we don't fix climate change, nobody's going to have any rights because every single person is going to be dead.
Yeah.
You see this kind of politics in today's world too. And it's hard to get on that person's side because you think like, well, do I want to live in a world that has, where people don't have access to abortion or don't have, or whatever, incredibly important thing that you think is also an existential threat to your personhood. Like you might get gay or trans Americans saying like, okay, like you want to save the world, but the world that you're saving is a world that's not welcoming to me.
Right.
So why would I be on board with you saving that world? And then Kate's answer would of course be like, if there's no world to save, then we can't fix it for you.
Right.
But if we save it, then we can go about fixing it for these people. But you can see how Kate exists in this place that is like, she's a lightning rod for all of the anger and hate of lots of different groups of people. And she throughout the text is a popular figure, is on the news a lot, is attractive, so she gets more press because of that, is sexually open. There's a sex tape of her, so people slut shame her, they send her rape threats, all of this stuff. After she's been sort of removed from a Fierce Blue Fire, then she starts organizing this like concert for climate change.
And this is what prompts Matt to leave her.
Matt leaves her because he knows what it's going to be, even though everyone around her that doesn't know what's going to happen thinks like a concert for climate change is the most anodyne, like non-activist bullshit, Bono-ass thing to do.
But there's also something funny that they point out in the novel, just like, this is a lot of work to basically be like a front, like planning a music festival, essentially.
Yeah.
As a front is just like, that's a comical amount of work.
Once the concert starts, they essentially take over downtown DC. They knock over buses to block it so that police can't get in, and they essentially seize downtown DC like Zuccotti Park or like Columbia University or any other numbers of protesters seizing a small area, or the Chaz thing in Seattle.
And they had like 100,000 people at the festival. Like almost all of them leave, but then a much bigger number eventually join the ranks.
They come back. She has big moments of success.
They police themselves.
She stands down a tank similar to the Tiananmen Square. And that becomes like an iconic moment. But like all things, like all of these things, it ends with violence. The police raid in, they kill a bunch of people.
On presidential order.
They kill a bunch of people, some of whom are characters that we've known for the entire novel.
That's the thing. Like almost everyone we follow in this book dies. Almost everyone. Not everyone, but most of them.
Yeah. At which point, like, things change. Like the world after that, it's like things are much, much more violent.
Although to Kate, nothing changed. Like she was like, this has always been the plan, basically.
Yeah. She knows that people are going to die, which is, to her credit, that is kind of one of the tenets of nonviolent political activism, is that like people are cruel to you and the world sees the coercive power structure being cruel to you and turns on that coercive power structure because they recognize that evil for its like violent coercion. Frankly, that's why nonviolent activism is difficult to stomach, because it requires incredible sacrifice, which is like what people to go on a little tangent. This is also like what people don't understand about Christianity, which is that like Jesus as political activist is like the guy that's like on the cross that is literally like, I would rather die than than like strike back against my enemies. Like that is such like a profound statement of nonviolent activism that like when, you know, a Christian nation or something bombs another country, you're just like, well, you don't really get it. You don't understand like what Christ is all about, but whatever. So like she, according to those principles of nonviolent activism, she like, they take the hit. Things don't really change. It doesn't really work. And that continues.
Although it kind of does long term, just not immediately. I think that everything in this cumulatively over time adds up to the world. Like I was saying to you, and I'm jumping around now, the first like 840 pages of this are like almost impossibly consistently bleak.
Yeah.
And then there's 30 pages of like, and then the right person was elected and she enacted all this different stuff and there's all this different positive change and like they shut all this stuff down, they taxed all the right people and blah, 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 blah. And just like, oh, this doesn't feel real. Like it feels like over the top what we fought for, we now get everything. And then when like almost as you're thinking that, it's just like, well, then actually in her second term, then she started like using military force on American citizens and doing this and doing that and whatever and whatever. You're like, oh, okay, so it didn't really. But I think kind of the point of this is that everything that all these characters did, including taking over downtown DC, eventually leads to a point where other countries in our country, whatever, there are, you know, the communist Chinese leadership is overthrown and like alt-right, far-right things in like Scandinavia are overthrown. And like
Anders Breivik as president is an insane like detail that
it all cumulatively. I think that's the point. It's just like you like at the end when they're having the conversation, it's just like I think they're talking to Ash maybe, and he's just like, "Look, this is going to take generations.
Yeah,
like we might have lost or whatever, but eventually we set them on the right path. We can only just hope that they're going to." Right.
Incremental activism.
Or maybe it's Tony Tarno's, I don't know, whatever. But it's like the kind of thing where it's like what you were saying before, these people gave it all they got, essentially saw no success.
Yeah.
But theoretically led to success down the road. So even
some
though
losses are better than other losses.
Her leading this thing where like hundreds of people were gunned down on presidential order and then only begat more violence and whatever, still a long-term, probably win. Yeah.
And then she is ultimately killed by a lone gunman in her office, which is traditionally the fate of people who advocate for nonviolent resistance. Okay, so that's Kate. Who else? That's Kate and Matt.
Yeah.
Who else?
We got Tony.
Okay, Tony is a climate scientist in the
But my question, before you go there, my question to you is like, if I asked you who the main character was, who would you have said?
I probably would have said Matt.
Same thing.
Yeah, I probably would have said Matt.
Hell yeah.
Tony is a climate scientist in the mold of, I forget her name. Was it Jane in Overstory? The one who was the plant scientist who like is
in the woods
is going to kill herself.
Yeah.
He does not see, like, he's the guy that is like, he's a scientist. He's not a politician. He has no interest in being politically correct. He has no interest in, compromising at the table. He is only really interested in, here's what we need to do. Otherwise, here's what's going to happen.
He goes to international summits and just like ruffles feathers, basically.
Yeah, yells at people. He doesn't really understand that you need compromise and you need people to work, because he knows that compromise is not how you save the world. You can only save the world through this one thing.
He's a widower. He's got 2 daughters.
Yeah, one of whom is a drug addict that he calls Khaleesi after Game of Thrones. I did not watch Game of Thrones, so I don't understand what this reference means.
Queen of Dragons. He's looking at a cat named Tyrion, who's also another Game of Thrones character.
And he also is, his avatar in the virtual reality thing is like,
You doing the John Cena thing right now?
Isn't it Jon Snow? I don't know.
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know what you mean by the John Cena thing.
Oh, he's doing like, you can't see me. You were just doing this in front of your face, like you were doing the John Cena. You're like,
oh, okay, not a reference I understand.
That's the extent of my John Cena knowledge in terms of wrestling.
Okay.
And he wears jean shorts.
He has another daughter named Holly.
Yep.
Who works for Fierce Blue Fire.
Yep. Tony also literally flies into Los Angeles while it's on fire to rescue his drug addict daughter.
In one of the more like action movie sequences in the book that doesn't, it walks us away from realism a little bit, but I'm willing to forgive that.
Although not really. I mean, there are multiple. They also make the point of saying like once in a generation means nothing anymore, because it no longer means anything because like it just keeps happening. But like there are multiple like once in a generation catastrophic climate events in this thing that are detailed, like a hurricane that's 1,000 miles wide that like submerges multiple cities, or like 10 miles of like South Carolina coastline or whatever.
Yeah,
right.
I had a guy said to me, I'll obscure details so his name is not used, but he after Hurricane Sandy, he was like, that's a once in a century storm. And I was just like, it's not. Mm-hmm. And like, you heard that on the news, and the news like
sensationalizes it.
Successfully tricked you into thinking that's a once in a century storm so that you can like
sleep better at night.
Yeah. And continue
but
with
also watch the news, because like this is something you will never see again. So you better stay tuned on our channel.
It's doing both. It's patting its head and rubbing its belly.
Yep. But like, there's also like a point where like at the end they're like, we're going to lose these like 8 cities. Like we're just like when they eventually write the deal that like kind of sort of gets enacted, they're like, we're bailing on these cities. Like Miami's done, New Orleans is done. Like you build a city below sea level. Like we can't help you. Yeah. We're moving you inland.
I mean, isn't like as we talk right now, a significant portion of the east coast of Texas got totally fucked up, right? And like there was tons of flooding.
Well, Gulf of Mexico, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like it's
and Beryl, yeah.
Yeah, totally like ravaged. And then like I think it's strange thinking of Texas like that, because you
think of it landlocked kind of?
Well, also like I remember a couple of years ago, I mean, it was like 6 years ago, they had a really bad hurricane there that messed things up really badly. But then just like 2 or 3 years ago, there was an incredible ice storm there.
Well, the other thing is like places like that, like just don't have the infrastructure to be ready for stuff.
Yeah.
And like they need to, because the thing is changing, like the world is changing. But like when I lived in Austin now almost 10 years ago at this point, like when there was even anything like approaching a freeze, the city is like, oh, we don't have like salt. Like we don't have salt trucks.
Yeah.
Like here, like you could have a much worse storm in New Jersey and the roads are fine to drive on because we know what we're doing.
But also because in Texas you have, like not to get overtly political, but like in Texas you also just have like a bunch of fucking people who like are in charge who don't give a shit about climate change. Yep. And also like are more concerned with like buying tanks for police stations than like buying, plows or whatever.
So you're telling me, is the final main character Ash, or is there more?
Well, no, because there's Shane and the
oh sure.
Let's talk about 6 Degrees / the Weathermen.
Yep. Okay. Well, there's Ash.
Okay, Ash is an autistic
numbers cruncher
who like became not famous but wealthy through developing an algorithm for sports gambling.
As soon as like 50 pages in, he's talking about like player efficiency rating in the NBA. I'm just like, guy gets it.
He's our guy. And he like has a very, sort of like Tony, he has a very like numbers approach to things. He knows how you need to solve this problem.
Like at one point in one of his memos, he's like, we need to eat our cats and dogs. We need to stop giving them protein. We need to eat them. And like, I thought this was like a private memo. And then like a couple chapters later, there's like, I heard a guy on the news say we should eat our cats and dogs. There's like,
yeah.
What?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when things get bad enough food wise, that's going to happen, right?
Theoretically.
Inevitably. Tomato.
Well, one's kind of optimistic and one's kind of pessimistic. Yeah. We're both saying yes, but just in different.
Tomato is the pessimistic one because nobody says tomato. I guess British people say tomato.
In their gardens.
And like Ash is part of the sort of government infrastructure because he's one of the guys that can like algorithmically figure out how we need to solve these problems. He's also his sister is married to the guy that was his old business partner, and they're involved in political circles that are important-ish.
It feels like everyone in this is like vaguely doing important things. It's just that we're not sort of following some of these as closely as others.
Yeah, well, they end up at the dinner with the guy who the senator who gets blown up with
by Toby.
Yeah,
Does Toby? No, it's not Toby. Keeper. Yes. Should we talk about Keeper?
Keeper is a drug addict who finds God and is imprisoned after engaging with giving 6 degrees information about a nuclear power plant that they end up bombing a nuclear power plant and causing things to go all to shit.
They also kind of frame him.
And they frame him, yes. And he is our working class eyes in the text. Mm-hmm. He's how we see that he's how we see like the average American being affected, because most of the people that we're with are wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to have these connections to power in order for the novel to really make sense to us. So this guy is the connection to, like, he's our connection to white supremacist groups. He's our connection to religion. He's our connection to just like how
literally seeing what's happening on the streets.
Yeah. Like he's living in a Walmart at one point with his wife and their child.
Which seems like it's messed up. It seems like a much better situation than living in the trailer that they were living in.
Yeah, kind of, actually.
Like there's community and there's like running water and there's electricity and there's like comfort to a certain extent.
Yeah, and he is, because he's so desperate for money, he is given the opportunity to make $50,000, and they don't tell him what it's for. But he ends up having a bomb strapped to his chest, and he ends up being a suicide bomber for an extremist climate activist group called 6 Degrees, or alternately Weathermen.
Mm-hmm. Who eventually are run by 3 people like you wouldn't suspect to be. But a lot of this is like you wouldn't suspect that person to be the blah 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 blah, but it's actually blah 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 blah.
Well, that was kind of the case with Weathermen, the Weathermen from the 60s.
Oh, I don't know them.
Okay, so the Weathermen were a group of communists. They went from being part of the SDS, which is Students for a Democratic Society, which were like students at like Columbia University, mm-hmm. and other places like that, like Mark Rudd, Bernardine Dorn, Bill Ayers, and they were like kind of like rich kid students who started bombing buildings in the 60s and to like end the war in Vietnam. And they take their name from the Bob Dylan song Subterranean
Homesick Blues,
because it says you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blow. So they were the weathermen.
Got it.
And a lot of the stuff in the book, it helps to know actually the weathermen to understand the terrorist group in the book, because the weathermen, Bernardine Dorn, Bill Ayers, Mark Rudd, there are other people in there, but those are the big 3. My mom actually went on a date with Mark Rudd back in the 60s, which she told me in like 1999. She was like, I dated this guy that tried to take over America. They did a bunch of obviously incredibly illegal shit like blowing up buildings, but the FBI, using this thing called COINTELPRO, which is counterintelligence program, pursued them in such an illegal manner that when they caught each of them, none of them actually went to prison because the FBI just like all the evidence that was obtained against them was obtained illegally. So none of it could be used in court. So it was just like, we have no case, even though we obviously know that these people committed all these
Whereas
crimes.
in reality today, or in the reality of this book over the next 20 years, that doesn't matter anymore.
Patriot Act.
Correct.
PRERA, is that what it's called in this? The stripping of Americans' rights over a significant amount of time because of fear of terrorism.
Yep. Tony says, I want a lawyer.
Yeah.
And they go, that's not how this works anymore. It's just like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, which is a line in the fucking Mark Wahlberg movie, Patriots Day.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's like yeah.
I know you hate that movie, but I like that movie.
I fucking hate it. I hate it so much.
We also have Jackie as a sort of main character.
Jackie, who...
Hedge fund trader, wife of a hedge fund trader.
But, in the beginning, sleeps with an actor.
Like a B-list actor, but like still a known guy.
Who did you think he was like? Is there an actor that you had in mind for him?
I mean, you need somebody handsome. Maybe because we were like, I didn't really think about it too much while reading it because I just kind of got like the sense of like a generically handsome guy, but maybe like a...
Let's say on 3, let's say who it is.
Okay. One, two, three.
Chris
Franco. I was thinking Chris Evans also, but he's too famous.
James Franco works because he was like quote unquote canceled.
Yeah.
So it's like this is exactly the path that someone who was canceled would take.
Also, because we were talking about, but like he really wanted to do like a Cormac McCarthy thing that like he just can't get made, and we were talking about how he is adapting like ambitious literature or whatever, right? So like, but somebody who's just like a handsome, who's known, who's not the biggest star in the world, but like a guy who like has a box office draw.
And like, or like Shia LaBeouf, because it's like, oh, he turned to God.
Yep.
Shia LaBeouf turned to God after like a bunch of bad shit came out about him. He's like, well, I found God, and now I'm like very much a Catholic.
I don't want to think about Chris Pine as the pastor, though. I like Chris Pine.
I do too. Yeah. So it could be like a Shia LaBeouf character.
Sure.
Who like through his, I think he's probably a little too weird and a little too like not handsome enough to actually be this guy, but like a person who rises through a bunch of people who are angry that this person,
like he's an even more evangelical Trump kind of.
Yeah.
But Jackie is a young marketing executive, kind of like an up and coming marketing executive who's like really good at her job.
Becomes incredibly wealthy.
Has a one night stand with this actor who becomes the pastor, goes into like PR, marries a hedge fund guy, and then has a change of heart, sees God, whatever.
Joins a Fierce Blue Fire.
Turns on
or
them.
Not a Fierce Blue Fire. Joins like whatever Kate's thing is later on.
Turns on them. And then she kind of fades away.
Yeah, she doesn't have that much to do with the last half of the book.
Like once she like upends the
book.
hedge fund.
Yeah. She's like a Clinton lib, kind of. Like the like, well, yeah, we have to solve these problems, but like you have to think of the economy first and what would happen with this. And like you don't really think that like actually like giving in to these leftists would really help. Like we have to meet in the middle.
Yep.
So she's very much like a Clinton Democrat. Right. Is that all the main characters?
I mean, I feel like they're not from the perspective of, but it feels like there are a lot of other important characters like Vic Love and the pastor and Tracy, whose last name I can't pronounce, and like these.
Yeah, Aja Mahon or something.
Like the presidents who are in, like, there's people who are like of great importance. We just don't follow them in the text.
Well, and then we have 6 Degrees, who is a terrorist organization that like go to increasingly violent. They become increasingly more and more violent as the text goes on.
I also do like, I think his name is Hamby, who's like the pastor's vice president. And then like they elect him president. He's just like, oh, I don't want this.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Real Mike Pence energy. All right. So what else? I mean, that's we went through the plot and those are all the characters. Like, again, what's remarkable to me about this book has nothing to do with, like, I think it is in some ways an artless book.
Well, I think there's art to the, like, it reminds me of the Curtis White Requiem thing where it's like there are many different ways the story is being told.
Yeah.
There is political memo that becomes like, let me bitch about my husband kind of thing. There is second person told from the perspective of the working man. There is Matt's literal like manuscript that he keeps trying to finish and can't finish. There is mixed media sort of, it's like newspaper headlines that like none of those like really impact the plot, but it's just like showing the deterioration of the world.
Shows you the world. Yeah.
And there's something again ambitious about where like I think I said it with Requiem, where just like it almost gives the author like the ability, like I kind of want to write like this now. Like let's just check on this character. I can write like a bunch like in this style or in this whatever, which I think is kind of cool.
And I think it's very well imagined in the like scope of perspectives. Like I think what Markley really nails is how this will all play out with people like agreeing and disagreeing and agreeing to a point, but being completely incapable of cooperating. And I think he's really, really, really good at the informational stuff. Mm-hmm. Like talking about like, you know, the way that bills are passed and the way specifically like the climate science stuff. I don't know if any of that is accurate. I'm sure there are mistakes. But like he really like he sells it in a very, very realistic way to me. I never felt like, oh, that's not realistic.
Well, I think the thing that he misses on is, and like there's part of this that becomes a very big deal behind the scenes. But I think, and again, this is just the fact that like this is written a couple years ago, because I'm sure this book took years to write.
Yeah.
I think he undersold how radically AI will shift the way that we interact. I think there's a lot of AI.
Really? You think he undersold that?
I think that he correctly, the level of like government espionage and where it's like beyond even their control, just like from birth, it's monitoring everything.
And I'm also using AI to like sort of map the best strategies for resistance and the cops using AI to map how they can get into places.
I think there is in like maybe 2 years from now, if even that long, I think that like everything we do will be in some form with that. And I think there is something that like, even if this book was written like 2 years ago, I don't think it would have been obvious. Like, I think it's like the kind of thing where like people sort of knew it would be coming, but like it kind of came faster. And I also think it would have been a bigger thing because like that is, as we're reading in the news now, such a contributor to climate worsening. That like that element is not at all mentioned here.
Yeah, because
it's mentioned within the scope of Big Brother, and
it's not mentioned in the scope of the resources that generative AI takes to use like literally like a million gallons of water.
Well, like it's like I don't know what, but it's like every 5 to 50. I don't know why the difference, but like 5 to 50 ChatGPT responses uses half a liter of water.
And with every single high school student in America using it to write every single essay, you have a million gallons of water being used a day or something like that.
And I think that really would have.
So you think it's exponentially going to be worse than this book? You think we're going to run into this climate disaster more quickly?
I don't know, because I think that there is something that like I think, and again, this goes back to the inherent like problem in the novel is like if we can get out of our own way.
Yeah.
But I think that people are realizing already, they're like, this is an issue that we need to address.
There is a part where Jackie's husband in the novel is like, he casually mentions this and then it never gets mentioned again, as far as I can remember at least, which is something that I really like because it's something that happens in the real world where she's talking about climate change and he's just like, what are you talking about? They already have nanotechnology that they're going to put up into the sky to cool things down. We don't have to worry about that. It's already being taken care of. And then you never hear about that again in the thing because probably there was like in the world of the novel like a venture capital thing or something like that where it's like, you know, someone had an idea and so they were going to make this thing but then it didn't get made or whatever. So yeah, I think stuff like that is interesting. But you think that he's not like properly.
I don't think it's a shortcoming of him. I think it's a little over 18 months ago, but November of 2022, when ChatGPT was released to the public, that changed everything. Like this stuff has existed. AI has been around since the 40s.
Yeah.
It's been informing stuff. Like I think like in terms of surveillance, in terms of like strategy, in terms of like playing video games, like a way that like a defense in Madden operates or whatever, right? That's all AI. It's just this generative AI at the level of access it is available to us did not exist before like 18 or so months ago, which was after this book came out.
And then now it's like exponentially in like a real like
every
Ray Kurzweil singularity kind of way, like moving us toward a like X point on the horizon very, very, very quickly.
Which I think is both like, again, goes back to our whole thing, good and bad. It's like there are good things, but it's also like there's a lot of problems we have to solve.
Yeah, I know. What else about this book? I mean, again, it's very fucking depressing. For all the climate violence, there's also like an unbelievable amount of gun violence in this novel.
Well, that's the story of America.
Also because like in the very beginning, I think it's in the beginning of this novel, but I might be thinking way back to the overstory. It says something like, where you find people willing to do violence against nature, you also find people willing to do violence against humans.
Sure.
Because they go hand in hand. And this book is filled with gunmen and terrorists and people being... You know, the scene where the Proud Boy-esque white supremacists string up the pastor, or not the pastor because that's the name of the guy, but like the preacher and keeper of his church.
Oh, no, they literally like flay him.
Yeah, it's like that. It's so violent.
I think this book, in a form, should inspire us that there are people who are willing to give their lives for change. There are people out there who are literally dying to make the world a better place.
Sure. Look for the helpers, Mr. Rogers style.
And yet, at the same time, the book's like, yeah, but they're all going to die and nothing's going to get accomplished.
And there's a ton of people who are actively working to make the world a worse place on purpose because, you know, there's that like New Yorker comic or whatever it is where it's like a guy in a like post-apocalyptic world telling a story around like a campfire to a bunch of like malnourished children, and he says something like, but for a brief period of time we maximized value for shareholders. And it's like, yeah, that is like what it is. That's what's going on here.
It's also scary that like this is all not that far in the future.
Yeah. And like you said, like in the time that we started to read this till when we finished reading it, enough like political, you know, hurricanes have hit Texas, and we had a presidential assassination attempt, and we've had mass shootings, and we've had, you know, another president sort of degrade in front of our eyes.
And like, it's not been like, we've been lucky. We've not like lost power, and it's not been like crazy, but like it has been consistently hotter this summer than it has been in years here.
Yeah. And I mean, I live in
It's cooler where you are, though.
But we also live in an incredibly privileged position in America. We don't live in like, you know, the global South. We don't live like, obviously, like this shit is way worse in Bangladesh, and it's way worse in.
Well, that's, I think, another thing about this book that like is very true. It's just like whatever the new tragedy is, like whatever, if something just happened, like, sorry, like we don't care about you anymore. Like we're caring about the new thing, right? Like there's like a typhoon that like wipes out like all of Bangladesh. It's just like, well, then this other thing happens. Like we kind of forgot about them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy.
I mean, I was at the movies the other day, and there's that like fucking thing where like Matthew McConaughey is like dressed up like a substitute teacher, and he's like, we're here in my hometown of Uvalde, Texas, where there was a mass shooting. And I was like, oh shit, there was a mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. Something that we never talk about anymore, even though that was not that long ago.
Yeah.
The only one we ever talk about still
Columbine
is, well, no, Sandy Hook. And the reason why we talk about Sandy Hook is like, ironically, in some like Streisand effect kind of way, because of Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Like he has kept that alive for so many years.
We have an email address, lottery@cageclub.me, if you want to write in about this or any book.
We got a long one from the Eggster.
This is our longest one yet. And she ends it with questions.
All right.
Meg's reaction to The Deluge. Wow, what a book.
Wow, what a book.
The scope of it reminded me of Underworld, but I also felt like there were blank spots in the novel that I don't remember being in Underworld. And I don't mean blank spots in a pejorative way, but in that there are spaces in the world of the novel that feel there but are left unsaid. It adds to the complexity of the world. I listened to this book and it had a full cast. I was surprised and confused about that at first, but Shreds showed me a screenshot of the ebook because he was curious about how the audiobook was structured to get across the structure of the novel, with the different characters having a side. Okay, there are boxes.
Yeah, it's structured, and I'm surprised we didn't talk about that. In like a, I think that might only be in the 6 degrees sections where you have a third person narrator, and then it briefly like breaks away from that
to talk about one character's thoughts
in a small box to move into a very close third person to talk about a singular character's thought,
which sometimes like comes naturally within the flow of the narrative and sometimes doesn't.
Yeah. And happens a lot more in the beginning of the book than at the end of the book, because it feels like a lot of formal devices, like people, like the artist gets sick of them by the end.
Although at the very end, it comes back.
Yeah.
He was curious about the audiobook was structured to get across the structure of the novel with different characters having asides. This was done by having many different readers. For the most part, each character that had a main chunk of the text about them are written by them. Tony, Ash, Jackie, Kate, Matt, Keeper, Shane. We didn't really talk about Shane.
Well, Shane is the mouthpiece, at least inside the text, the point of view character that we get for 6 Degrees, which is the terrorist organization.
Which it seems like they're, not to congratulate terrorists, but they're like using the Stand as, what book are they using as their codex?
Oh, well, one of them is using the Stand. I think she is using the Stand.
Where they're like mailing each other like junk mail, but it's like encoded in a way that seems crazy. Each of them had their own reader, and then people who had a lot of asides, like Murdoch, also had a recognizable reader. Then on top of that, there were a handful of other readers from more minor characters, like whoever did the interviews with Kate and a handful of Vanity Fair articles. There's also like op-eds by like the vice president who steps down. Like,
and the person who ends up marrying Matt. Now, the more that I think about it, the more book-like it does seem. It moves away from realism, because it's like every character, like it's like, oh, that character that interviewed Kate had to end up marrying Matt so that she comes back, so that maybe Markley doesn't have to introduce a new character and write a whole new character.
But it's fine. Kate's reader was interesting because she was the only one who popped into other sections and read Kate's dialogue, while the other reader did everything else.
This sounds confusing as hell to me. I would be, if I were listening to that audiobook, I would be probably very confused.
Part of what was so interesting about the scope was that it seemed like every set of characters was undercut by another set of characters at almost every turn, which we kind of talked about.
Yeah.
But most of them wanted the same thing at the end of the day, which we also talked about. It's like Meg's not even listening to us. It was interesting to see advocacy through policy, terrorism, and marketing or branding play against each other. Obviously, the quote-unquote advocacy that the marketing people were doing were for businesses, not for the planet. Again, shareholder value, right?
Yeah.
I also thought it was interesting to see the side of the weathermen from non-violent, parentheses, against human life, protest to violent terrorism. The varying degrees of closeness in perspective felt interesting. I liked that by the end, it was revealed that everything you read was something that characters within the universe could have read, too. Matt's chapters from his book, Jackie's from her memoir, Tony's written by the AI, which is also kind of interesting. This is going to be embarrassing for me if this was explicitly stated, but I believe the Keeper's chapters were like were a VR program where you could experience his life like some kind of voyeur, which is why they were written in the second person perspective. I don't remember that, but that would make sense.
I certainly don't think that it's explicit in the text, so I think Meg is acquitted from the charges of being embarrassed.
I also think, going back to my AI thing, there's a lot of VR and AR in this, but I don't think there is going to be enough. I think there will be even more in real life.
Yeah.
Maybe not VR, but AR.
Well, there's a lot of like kids living inside their thing and stuff like that.
I think we've kind of missed VR, which maybe is good, like Ready Player One VR.
Yeah.
But like the AR, like the augmented, like having like Apple lenses or whatever. Something else that happened narratively toward the end of the novel was there were more, quote, overlap between the character sections, like things happened simultaneously rather than consecutively. The thing that comes to mind is both Ash and Tony mentioning Ash leaning in to persuade Tony not to leave the project.
Right, yeah.
It made me wish that stuff like that happened more often, but then the novel would have been a million times longer.
Longer than this email, Meg?
My favorite character was Ash. I found his takes on the situations to be most compelling and trustworthy. In contrast to his ideas on policies, I was extremely horrified about his experiment with his son about the calories, which was really dark, But it was also an effective narrative device because the next chapter or two was a Keeper chapter, and he was living the type of life that Ash was basing his experiment on. If the book was longer...
Do you want to explain what Ash's experiment was? Or did we already do that?
So Ash has a newborn baby that he did not want. His husband wanted a baby. Ash is like, it's irresponsible to bring a baby into this world. Seth eventually convinces him, let's have a baby. They have a baby with a surrogate. Seth dies in the DC siege. So Ash then realizes there is like this shock value. There's like the food index or whatever. And he's like, there might come a time in the very near future that even we as wealthy people will have to subsist on a much lower amount of calories. I'm going to do this to me and my 18-month-old baby. And so he cuts down both their caloric intake to the point where the baby won't stop crying, and then eventually goes beyond crying and just like just doesn't have energy to like do anything.
And starts like, having like gross hair, and
his hair falls out. His stomach is like distended and just like it's dark.
Yeah.
And then eventually Ash is just like, okay, enough of this.
Yeah. I agree with Meg that Ash is like the trustworthy character. It is a weird shortcut that authors have used in the last 20 years to make a character autistic as a means of amplifying a certain kind of voice. Like a character that will be incapable of reading social cues, and then that allows that character to say what they need to say.
Right.
Instead of having them have to get that out in some way that would be narratively inconvenient, or they have information, but, you know, it would be complicated by having human emotion. So like you can have this character that just acts essentially as a narrative computer. I don't like that trick. I think Ash as a character works in this book, so it didn't bother me too much, but it is something that I am very suspicious of as a narrative technique.
I think it's fair. If the book were longer, Egg writes, I would have liked to see how Forrest grew up. I feel worried about him. Obviously, he's not a real person, but he's not going to achieve Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Or at least he'll be fucked up by it. But after
I don't know why I thought this, but the second you said that, I thought the marvelous Mrs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Pretty good. After Keeper's chapter where his girlfriend was skinning the dog based on Ash's paper and insight, it didn't quite make it worth Ash torturing his son, but explained it a little.
Yeah.
It's hard to articulate how it made me feel because it's like living without food is a very real problem that many Americans face, but it just felt so inexcusable to purposely withhold food when he was able to get it.
From a baby who doesn't understand.
Like he's not like he was donating the calories that he was withholding to a food bank. He was just doing it to gain insight. It felt a little evil to me.
Yeah, for sure.
I also found Jackie's story interesting, but I wish there was more about her home life and stuff outside of her being nouveau riche. I wanted to know more about what her mom's deal was. Like, was her suicide pastor related, or was it something more personal?
Yeah, we didn't talk about that at all, did we?
No.
So Jackie's mom kills herself. She is in a place that is flooding, and Jackie goes to rescue her. And when she goes in...
But her mom is already, like, before this, is, like, kind of a hoarder, kind of, like, social, like, self-appointed, like, self-whatever, social outcast.
I think that scene is more about juxtaposition with Tony rescuing his daughter from the fire in California, because you have contrasting elements. You have the flood versus the fire, and you have contrasting
success versus failure, kind of.
Yeah, and differences in characters, being like Jackie's character is concerned with the value of money and stuff, and Tony is concerned with, you know, the planet. Which, I mean, I don't know what conclusions I draw to that, but I think that there's like a parallel.
He's doing something there. Yeah. The idea of parents within the context of the novel seemed to go back and forth to the point where the point was entirely muddied, because at first it seems like it's bad to bring children into the world, but then it started to make a point that it's parents who had more of a stake to save the world because they want their children and grandchildren and so on to be able to live in the world. I think the book did an interesting job of showing everyone on a macro and micro scale. For example, Tony cared about things on both a micro and macro scale, and that he cared deeply about his family and was also taking strides to improve the Earth. Kate cared about things on a macro scale, but not micro. She cared deeply about the environment, but seemed to not really care about the emotional well-being of those around her, and was deeply selfish in that way. Then there's Seth. It really bothered me. He's the one who pushed Ash to become a father, then risked and ended his life as a result of being involved with the siege. Like, I guess there's something to be said about needing to do things to maintain the kind of world you need your child to live in, but his balance was needed for Ash as a parent, which, I don't know, maybe is unfair of me, but I feel like it's ultimately the most unfair to Forrest.
Yeah.
All
that makes sense to me.
After the siege, I wondered if the book was going to shift from environmental horror to AI horror. There was when the AI was disseminating, quote unquote, disseminating the different tactics used and the protesters following its orders. While it didn't switch from environment to AI, the horror of the AI happens off the page. It feels like within the universe of the novel, AI will be the thing driving the fear of the characters as the environment was in this one. For the deluge, it felt like the ending was almost positive in that things weren't extremely dire, but then AI was the fear almost unspoken.
I don't know that I felt that. I don't think that it didn't seem to me like Markley was as suspicious of AI as I am. He seemed to be more in your boat.
But also you weren't suspicious of it like 2 years ago.
Oh, that's a good point.
I think he would be. If he wrote this now, I think he would be.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I did like the fact that AI was a subtle horror. It helped in the siege. It allowed Tony to be able to write his memoir, but the horror is still there. It's going to be used by other people to write their memoirs, not living on borrowed time. It's going to be used by cops more and put people in jail who haven't done anything, but who have been put on a list by the algorithm. I mean, that's a Minority Report.
Yeah, I think there even is a part in the book where they mention Minority Report.
I think so.
Where he's like, oh, this is like some fucking Minority Report shit. Mm-hmm. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is.
I was saying to you that I think that there's also something nice about this book that like they use like celebrities in a way that like Beyonce, but like she's like an old lady at
the shocking one to me is Anders Breivik. That Anders Breivik is a person who did a mass shooting in Sweden, Norway, and he killed a bunch of people. And because Norway does have a policy that the maximum sentence for any crime, no matter what it is 21 years. He will be a person who's out. And as someone who is an archetype of that far right wing ideology, as the world moves more toward that, that sort of thing does feel more and more realistic. I'll also say in these last couple of weeks, England has had its
back the other way.
Largest victory by Labour since 1905, and France has handily defeated Marine Le Pen, who is a fascist right winger, and so there are multiple European countries that have taken steps to move significantly left. Only in the last couple of weeks, when both of those things seemed like they were not going to happen very recently. So maybe there is something to hold on to.
Yeah. I think my personal fear, Egg writes, with AI is that it's like an atrophied muscle. If all you do is sit and not move a single muscle, you'll eventually lose the ability to move them around at all. If you don't, for example, write poorly written book reports to your friends for their podcast, you start to lose the ability to think critically about books.
Good one, Egg.
I feel like half the time I make connections about the books during the course of writing my email. If I just plugged in an outline for ChatGPT to spit out my outline in a cohesive essay, I would lose something of value. That connection wouldn't be made, and the idea wouldn't be put into the either. And on a small scale, that's just the three of us and your tens of thousands of listeners. Correct. But multiply that by however you want, and it really adds up on all the lost sparks in the world. And I feel like this book really put that into perspective for me. I joke that my emails are like homework, but I really do enjoy the process of writing them and needing deadlines for them. I also think that people using AI to just do the work are not using it correctly. And I think that will play out in a way over the next couple of years that if you're using it to enhance what you're able to do, it will be good.
We'll see.
Anyway, Egg writes in all capital letters, back to the book. The one thing I didn't like was that Shane being Kate's ex-girlfriend felt a little too quote-unquote book to me.
That's yeah, good. Glad.
in a way that was different from how the rest of the book felt quote unquote real, even though, as we've talked about, like a lot of it kind of
I've through our conversation, I've come to think a little bit differently about that. But yeah, I felt exactly that same way.
You said book. Yeah. It felt like a narrative device. And I thought the name Green Tea Party was very funny and cute, but that was the one thing I could never see happening, Republicans doing environmental stuff.
Well, I remember listening to this speech that Grover Norquist gave. You know who Grover Norquist is?
I do not.
So he's like a sort of
goalie.
No, he's a right-wing think tank guy. And he was talking about how it's way, way easier for like Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul to get together on something than it is for like Hillary Clinton and Mitt Romney, which feels insane.
Like extremists as opposed to centrists?
Yeah, because the extremists, like, they might disagree on everything, but then they'll agree on campaign finance reform.
Yeah.
Like Rand Paul on the extremes of his party is not benefiting from campaign finance stuff the same way that Mitt Romney is. And so the people in the middle are always going to be like, we're not getting rid of like mega donors and super PACs and things like that, because those are the people that benefit the most from those. But the people on the very outside of the thing, they see those for what it is because they're not blinded by benefiting from them. So they can actually, even though like Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders don't get along on anything else, might be able to like come together to write a bill trying to ban super PACs.
Yep.
So yeah, if those people can like hold their nose long enough to like be in the same room with each other, maybe they could actually get something done.
Well, there's the thing, like when they get together to write this actual bill and Tony's like, what the fuck is she doing here?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, she has to be here because without her, theoretically,
none of the oil companies come to the table.
Correct.
Yeah.
And at the end, she's just like, oh, by the way, I'm not going to do this without knowledge. And he's like, oh, I knew it.
Yeah.
But, feels realistic kind of in that way.
Sure does.
I guess 3 questions.
Oh, and then they start fucking. I don't like that part either.
I've always respected you.
You like get out of here with that. That is bullshit. Like you don't get out of here with that.
It just felt nice to be near someone.
Yeah.
Question number 1, we already answered, but she has her answered. Who do you picture the pastor to be? At first, I pictured Tom Cruise.
Too famous.
Too old, she says. Then I picture Chris Pratt. Just another Chris.
Chris Pratt is a good one though because he is like
you said Pine. I said Evans.
He's like a turn to religion guy.
Who is your favorite character or group of characters? We didn't talk about favorite, did we?
I honestly feel most ideologically aligned with Kate.
I like Ash, but not. I like Ash when he's talking about sports. Like before Ash becomes environment guy, just that sports guy. I think it's kind of funny. Like his mom's just like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "I'm in Vegas doing sports stuff." I like Tony.
Yeah, I like Tony. I felt for Keeper too, even though he's like obviously like the biggest piece of shit.
Yep.
But he's also like, he's the one who is most likely to be a piece of shit based on outside factors, right? He doesn't have the privilege that everyone else has, so he has to dig around.
She says, who do you think was the face a la Adam Levine of the novel?
Matt.
And then she says for Stephen, was it your decision to have the audiobook be read by a full cast?
According to my calculations, that's my Stephen
That's
Markley.
an Ohio accent. That's pretty good.
That's my Stephen Markley nerdlinger voice.
Stephen Markley, if you're out there and you want to talk to us,
yeah,
we reached out to your people.
Yeah, and dismiss the fact that I just called you a nerd and did a voice. I'd imagine that was his choice. I don't like that as a choice.
She says all in all powerhouse of a novel. I don't know if I like it or not. I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks. I remember the only one that I've ever listened to, I think, that had more than one reader, and I think I listened to this explicitly for this reason, was Chuck Palahniuk's book Rant.
Yeah.
Because that's an oral history, so it kind of makes sense there. But like having Kate pop into other people's sections or having like whatever, it's just like that feels a little...
I think I would find it confusing.
Yeah.
I don't really listen to fiction audiobooks because with fiction, I like to have it on the page that I can reread and look at it and underline and do all this stuff. I listen to nonfiction audiobooks, which wouldn't have something like that really, except for I've listened to a couple of like, the oral history of The Simpsons or whatever.
Sure. In my reading of Live Blog 2, which was Live Blog 2023, and then it crossed into 2024, so she renamed it Live Blog 2, which I'm still way behind on, but I'm catching up. She says, and this is not about audiobooks, but she says, reading a book, she's basically talking about Megan Boyle, past interview guest on the show.
Friend of the pod.
Was talking about how she has like a stack of books that she wants to read, but just doesn't have the energy to do. And she's like, reading a book is like attentively listening to a friend nonstop.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that can be, you kind of have to be in the right space for that. So.
For sure.
Keep reading.
Whoa.
Well, also email in lottery at Cage for
Premature. Premature.
I've lost my streak. I was at a really good streak.
Yeah. So you feel like you can just, okay.
By the way, this is our 86th book for the podcast.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting there.
Episode, I think 108, but book 86.
Yeah. Today's crime is.
Anything else you want to say before we do crime?
What well, let's go back to.
Oh, here's actually one thing I wanted to say, and then I'm sorry to cut you off. This feels to me like the Overstory in that, like, no one who needs to read this book will read the book.
Well,
the only people who will read the book are people like, yeah, we know there's a problem.
It feels like a natural pairing of the Overstory, because whereas the Overstory was about plants, I think this book is about people. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like there's a, and the Overstory is a lot more hopeful because it's not about people.
Well, yeah, because like when we die, plants will be fine.
Yeah, it's about the cooperation of nature and how like nature is naturally symbiotic, whereas people are naturally not symbiotic. People are naturally like at odds with each other.
Yep.
Because our reason acts in counter to our instinct. I think more than any other book that we've read, this lends itself really naturally to a Chernobyl-style miniseries.
I was thinking about, so there is a site. I don't remember the name of the site. I tried to find it, and like I couldn't find it for this. But I've seen before that for very, very popular. I have no idea how popular this book is, but for very, very popular books that have not been adapted, there are websites that people submit their dream casting.
Yeah.
And like I don't really think about that for anybody other than the pastor, because the pastor is like supposedly like someone from the movie star realm, right? Yeah. But it
would be funny if they cast like as the pastor, but it was just like Chris Pratt, like playing Chris Pratt. Like, that would be funny. He wouldn't do it because he doesn't have a sense of humor about himself. But, yeah.
Chris Pine might do it, but maybe not. Because it feels like this is the kind of thing that, like, there are so many characters that you know so much about that people who are passionate about both this book and, like, that kind of thought exercise would, like, be really hungry for. And I couldn't find this book on, like, whatever 2 websites I saw of this. Anyway, it would be sprawling in a way... Like, it couldn't be a movie. There's too much for a movie.
It would be a miniseries. It would be a Chernobyl-style miniseries, 10 episodes.
The same way that, again, a book that Meg referenced that we had in our unadaptable module, no, very adaptable, but like Underworld. It feels like that has to be like a miniseries.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just do it chronologically, right? You would just...
Yeah, piece of cake. Mm-hmm. I think it's super adaptable. The only thing you would run into any trouble with is the like brick walls of text about policy, but I think you could do that in a very like...
You could do like news people on the screen reading a thing, or like it's...
Yeah, or just have
doable.
Like the many sort of... like you can have episodes that are sort of more clerical and it works.
Yeah.
Have information dense. I think it works. But I think it's a real natural for that. I think it would be a great miniseries.
I'm going to break the rules here, and I'm going to look this up on Wikipedia and see if there was any... Stephen Markley has his own. This book does not have its own. Although apparently, this is what I said to you. This is from years ago, though. Markley's reportedly working on an adaptation of Ohio for an HBO series to be produced by Sam Levinson.
Right.
Which, as we're another earth-shattering change in the last 5 weeks, Euphoria season 3 shooting in January.
Fuck Sam Levinson. What did he produced something that I watched recently that I kind of liked? I think it was a movie.
Sam Levinson?
Yeah.
Filmography, film producer, Malcolm and Marie is the only thing. No, wait. Executive producer, he did Pieces of a Woman, which is the Vanessa Kirby movie. He did Ex Pearl Maxine.
Oh, Maxine is the thing I was thinking of. Yeah. Of course.
Did you like Maxine?
No.
No, that's what I was going to say. And he also did the movie Breaking, starring John Boyega.
Yeah.
Pre-Star Wars cancellation.
But
keep reading.
Sam Levinson sucks. Today's crime is
like that's how we end the episode.
today's crime is poaching elephants, not eggs. Don't poach.
Don't poach our egg.
Don't you dare poach our egg.
God reached his hand down from the sky. He flooded the land, then he set it afire. He said, fear me again. No, I'm your father. Remember that no one can breathe underwater.